The Voice by Jeff Coleman. "You can't do this," whispered a malevolent voice in the dark, a sound Amanda hadn't heard in years. She gritted her teeth, dug in her heels, and tried to stand her ground, but it was persuasive, and Amanda didn't know if she was strong enough to defy it. The voice had been with her from birth, a dry, hollow rattle that only she could hear. Its jealous strains had always tempted her to doubt, but the successes of her youth had made her confident, perhaps overly so, and for decades the voice was little more than a nuisance, a background static in a constellation of accomplishments and accolades. She'd conjured whole worlds ex nihilo, populated an entire cosmos in the realm where reality and conscious thought were one. Still the voice was persistent, pointing out the flaws, the imperfections in her work. "That world over there," it would say, "look how it wobbles and tilts on its axis." And Amanda would see it as if for the first time and realize the voice was right. "And that world over there," the voice would continue, "look at its bulbous, oblong shape. How can you call yourself a professional?" And Amanda would look again and once more realize the voice was right. On and on the voice argued, and no matter how long Amanda honed the finer details, no matter how long she strove to satisfy the exacting requirements of perfection, she always fell short, and the voice was always there to remind her. Amanda's final attempt had been almost 10 years ago, a tiny desert world that had come to her in a dream. In her eyes it was a possibility for redemption, an opportunity to reduce that awful voice to silence at last, and she labored for the better part of a year, drawing on every resource left at her disposal. When at last she was finished, sweaty and short of breath, the voice offered a terse appraisal, a good idea that suffers from a lackluster implementation. Amanda withered. A few weeks later, she retired. But the urge to create had proved too strong to ignore. She tried, of course. For years she tried. She'd worked other jobs, and when she got home she would occupy her off hours with various unrelated hobbies, all in the vain hope of drowning a desire that had only ever led to heartbreak and frustration. But the old dreams refused to die, and though Amanda had found some temporary respite from the voice, she knew it wouldn't be long before she would have to try again. When that time finally came, when the need to create grew into an all-consuming fire that threatened to scour her soul to the bone, she locked herself in her basement, where she'd covered her old workshop with a faded, dusty tarp. Now, taking a deep breath, she swept the tarp aside. "What are you doing?" asked a familiar voice. "You've been out of practice for years. What makes you think you'll succeed now?" Amanda trembled. She knew it spoke the truth. Even during her peak, the voice had found plenty of flaws in her work. What made her think she could do better now? Still, the desire to create overwhelmed her. It was an ocean of power held back by only a single floodgate, a force of nature that would destroy her if she didn't channel it properly. So she ignored the voice. She picked up her old tools, dusted them off beneath the dim illumination of a nearby desk lamp, and after a shuddering, rattling breath, she got to work. "Didn't you hear me?" asked the voice, incredulous at her determination. "You're going to fail. You're going to fuck this up just like you fuck up everything." Amanda hesitated. She tried to focus on the nascent world in front of her, tried to shut out the voice's spiteful remarks, but it was hard. It was so hard. The tool slipped in her fingers, and she wondered not for the first time if she was making a mistake. But that urge, that need to create, it burned so much, and every moment she spent second-guessing instead of working was a moment of torture and almost unbearable agony. So in spite of the voice's constant rebukes, in spite of her own crippling doubts, she kept at it. On and on she told, for hours or days she couldn't say. And as the rusty hinges and squealing iron gears began to turn as they once had so many years ago, the pin-up magic burst inside her like a grenade, a shower of bright, coruscating sparks that filled Amanda with almost euphoric joy. When at last she finished, the voice offered a scathing critique. That world, it mocked. Look how crude and simple it is. Hardly your best. Amanda considered its remarks. You're right, she said. But after having released a decade of frustration, after having poured her soul into the project, she discovered that was okay. She learned that through the lens of imperfection, beauty could only be magnified. The voice sputtered and could offer no reply. For so long it had been used the truth as a weapon. Now that weapon was useless. Deflated, it fled into the darkness and was silent at last. Amanda knew it would return, that in the fullness of time it would make her doubt again. But instead of shrinking away from the inevitability, instead of hanging up her tools for another 10 years, she decided she would face it head on.